Hello, everyone, and welcome to Making the Shift. We are so excited. Today we have Lyric here, who is also known as Neurodivergent Rebel, and we cannot wait to have this conversation with you. We are talking all about gender identity and autism and autistic relationships, and I'll do a quick intro of you. So Lyric is a queer, pansexual, trans-nonbinary, polyamorous, autistic, whose pronouns are they, them. Lyric owns a consultancy for Neurodivergent Consulting and is the author of a best-selling business ethics book, which was praised in Forbes, which is so impressive. Congratulations on that. And your kind of big mission is just, it sounds like the name Neurodivergent Rebel came from this rebelling against a society who puts all of these kind of constructs on us and values assimilation, rebelling against a culture that values assimilation, I think you say, right?
Yeah. And so, it's something that is like for me as a human being, my whole life before I knew I was autistic, because I didn't find out I was autistic until I was 29. I was called a rebel. Like I was told I was being rebellious just for existing in as my full self. And people just thought I was trying to be different, and it was meant to be an insult. But really, it was just me being me. But I didn't know any other way. It was just natural to me to be myself. And so once I found out I was autistic, I decided to kind of reclaim that rebel thing that had been used against me my entire life and use that as something that's more empowering for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I was going to say too, and that's like, as we journey forward and society becomes more accepting towards things, it's got to be liberating to, for the autistic community and as we make gains forward, I feel like that is something that is good for us, because as you mentioned, I think growing up feeling like having to rebel, but people just being mean, it's just like, that's not the kind of society we want to live in.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it's like when you're different in any kind of different, like in any group, and you stand out, being autistic is one way you stand out, even if you don't have a word for it. Unfortunately, like people can be really mean to anything that they perceive as different. And then, not a lot of autistic people in my age group, I'm in my mid-30s and older, like we grew up not knowing we were autistic. So we grew up with people being mean to us, but not knowing why people were so mean to us. And so that was like another like really, hard level to it. It's like, oh, people are so mean and I don't know why people are being mean.
Yeah. And, I would love to kind of talk about the big picture of like, why are we having this conversation specific to, autism? Like, how does gender identity fit with autism? And you said something on one of your videos, and I forgot to say that Lyric is like an on fire content creator, like great YouTube channel, so much good content there. But you said in one of your videos, you said it's not compatible to be anti-LGBTQIA and pro-autistic.
No, it really isn't.
Maybe you could share, I know you did a poll on Twitter. Maybe you could kind of share like the general results of that.
Yeah, so last time I did a poll on Twitter with this, it was like 3,700 and something people responded to it. And it was a really simple question. It was like, autistic people, do you identify as being a member of the LGBTQIA umbrella, that big umbrella? So it's, your orientation, who you're attracted to or not, or, your gender identity with whether you're trans or non-binary, and all of those things. And inclusive of all of that, it was like 75 or 74% were like, yes, I'm in that queer umbrella, and only like 24 point something percent was no. And it was really cool to see that finally like broken out in a number. And then later we had more like official research come out. Like there was a Spectrum had an article come out with a survey that had like thousands of people, so that like proved that autistic people are more likely to be trans, which like finally we're like, oh yeah, we've known this for a while. And see,
Right.
that was one of the first things I noticed when I first was diagnosed autistic back when I was 29 and started entering autistic spaces. You know, as like I knew I was queer my whole life. I've known since I was like, you know, like probably about the time hormones started kicking in, I started to understand that more. So, you know, preteens or so, I've known I was queer, but I didn't know I was autistic. And so it's like all of a sudden, you know, I'm used to being, especially I'm from Texas, so that's like in the minority, and most queer people in Texas are still living in the closet when I was growing up. And so like coming into autistic spaces, all of a sudden it was like the straight people were in the minority in autistic spaces. Like it was noticeable how most of the autistic people around me were actually queer. And it was like, wow, this is really cool. You know, because it was like, I mean, in two ways, I'm like finding my people, so to speak, that are like relate and understand my experiences in multiple avenues.
Yeah. And I think the study you're talking about, I think you talked about it in one of your videos, and it was like 650,000 people were
It was a
surveyed. So it was a huge
big
group of
group.
people. And it was that all of those people were people who didn't identify with the sex they were assigned at birth. And in that group, they were 3 to 6 times more likely to be autistic. So that's, you know,
Yeah.
for parents watching this, for professionals watching this, that's such a significant number. And, you know, makes sense why you can say you can't be anti-LGBTQIA and be pro-autistic. Accepting, you know, and understanding gender identity is such an important part of being able to support our kids and like support our kids in ways that most people didn't have growing up.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you said something really interesting in one of your videos. I sound like such a stalker, but you said that your gender was assigned at birth, which is exactly what it felt like, that it was something assigned to you, like you had no decision in it. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and that's, you know, what it is for a lot of us. It's like all of a sudden it's like I've been given this label. It's like, okay, here's this label and this role and all of these expectations that come with this label. And then it's like, you know, I remember being probably I was in preschool. So I don't know, how old are you in preschool? 4 or 5 years old or so, preschool age, and thinking, you know, that adults are asking you this really horrible question. Adults ask kids. It's a loaded question. It's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it's like me, like strongly not feeling like a woman, even as a young child, but not understanding like how to explain that at that young age. I was like, my answer is like, I want to be a cat. Because I literally couldn't imagine growing up and being a person, because it was like this was this expectation that like everyone had of me, and it was like this does not even compute to me. And then, you know, like with like being an autistic person, like for a lot of things, it's just like social constructs. Like for me, I know like I look at them, I see other people doing them, and like they just like I can understand why they could maybe make sense for other people, but like some of them just don't seem logical to me. And it's even been like since I was like a young person, like, you know, it's like I'm, you know, you mentioned listing out all of my labels with going into this. I'm also polyamorous. And that's like I've known I was polyamorous since I was like 12. And I've known that that was something that was shameful. And being someone who was female presenting when I was 12, like that was really thought of as being slutty and inappropriate to not have that monogamous point of view, you know, especially in the Bible Belt. And it's still
Right.
like people still like you tell them that and people think you're just a horny pervert, or you're just like they fetishize it, or they have all these ideas like, oh, don't tell my husband that, they're going to get bad ideas. And it's like, I don't want your husband, like, you know, like all
Right.
of these things that people think because they just hear all of these stereotypes. And it's like, you know, being autistic, same thing, like there's all these stereotypes. If whether you're queer, you're trans, there's all these stereotypes. And really with all of these things, we're people, you know, that's what it comes down to, is we're humans just like anyone else.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
speaking of, let's break down some of these terms. How about that? We throw you a term and maybe you give us a quick definition for anyone who doesn't know or is
Quick
confused.
fire.
Yeah. Quick fire.
Sure.
Okay. Here we go. Let's do the first one as biological sex.
Oh yeah, so that's generally going to be that assignment, right? And the thing that I want to make sure we point out about this is people like I'm non-binary, so people all the time are like, there you can't just make up a new gender. And one, like, non-binary is not a new concept; it's been around like since before colonialism. But even sex, like the physical characteristics that we stereotypically assign male or female, isn't binary. Like, there's a whole spectrum of human sex characteristics, and we have got intersex people. So we want to make sure, like, we realize, like, those people exist, right? And
Right.
sex and gender are both spectrums. Neither one is black and white. Like, nature, and you look around, is not black and white either. Like, the only thing that's black and white usually are things that are created by people, binary code, like all of these concepts, good and evil, male and female, very binary. It's like artificial, created by people. Really, it's not, it's not even natural when you think about that. Like, nothing in nature is just binary.
Yeah, so true. So biological sex, I think I've heard you say before too. It's like, what's in your pants?
Yeah.
Essentially.
Right.
And it's like, why are we so obsessed with knowing that? Like, right? Like, it's kind of creepy.
It's true.
So let's get into some of these others. Okay. Sexual orientation.
Yeah, and so I like to say orientation, because it's not always like, it's who you're attracted to, basically. And so like asexual people, for example, are included in that spectrum, and they have attractions that have nothing to do with sexuality or being sexually attracted. They can be romantically attracted to people. And so like I don't use the term sexual orientation, just because there's so many ways you can be attracted to someone that have nothing to do with sexuality or sex. So that's just me personally, but really it's all about who you're attracted to. Or if you're completely not attracted to anyone at all, that's valid too. Like, some people are completely asexual, aromantic, not attracted to other people, and that's a valid spectrum. And autistic people fall in that spectrum sometimes too. So that's really important to realize and not forget about.
Yeah, I have an autistic colleague who identifies as asexual, and she's like, she'll just post, she'll be like, I just don't get it. Like, I just don't, so it's just always really interesting to hear all the perspectives and ways people identify. Okay, how about gender then? That leads us to bigger discussion.
Yeah, so that really is this social construct. We've got this social identity. And so, we say, gender as the social construct, it's like how society says a person should behave based on whatever the expectations of society are for, the person in that assigned role, right? And so it's a completely made up concept, right? It doesn't really exist if we take it away. And so, like, for example, like looking at, it changes like country to country, or even time period to time period. If you go back several hundred years, like, men wore white powder wigs and makeup, and men wore dresses, and things were very different once upon a time. So it's like all of that is dependent on time and space, because it
Right.
is like relative, and it's also dependent on social norms. And so when we have people who are gender nonconforming, or like are falling outside of what is considered socially normative or socially acceptable, we see more of that, that bullying, and people being afraid, unfortunately, because people are othered instead of like accepted and included. We meet people with like, oh, that's something different, I don't understand it, instead of being curious and welcoming and receptive. So that's like, we want to make sure, like, we're not forcing everyone into being socially acceptable, because some of us are going to struggle with that more than others, and the people who are more multiply marginalized and have multiple identities are going to struggle in more ways to be able to conform to what's socially acceptable. And you shouldn't have to, like, the weight of the expectation to be someone or something you're not, it's a really heavy burden, and it kind of tells you, like, oh, who you are deep down inside isn't enough, and you need to follow that up, because we don't want to, that's not okay here. And that's soul destroying.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much research on masking, and it's like when you have to hide your true authentic self to conform, that just over time builds up so much anxiety and leads to other difficulties. And so I feel like that ties directly into that as well, you know.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, big
And it
time.
just makes me think, hearing you talk about it, like how many people are avoiding these conversations just because they don't know how to have them or they're uncomfortable, you know?
Mhm.
And I'm sure that that just leaves, like, you think about kids, like you say, you knew this was who you were from the time you were so young, even like preschool, you
Oh,
know,
yeah.
adults avoid those conversations because they don't know how to have them.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
spent so many hours, in mental anguish over these things on my own as a kid because, you even if you don't, like, know why, you can tell when attitudes about something in like, around you in society are not good, or, like, you can tell, like, this is something other people won't understand, and I keep it to myself, which is kinda similar about finding out I was autistic as an adult. It was, like, all these things I had hidden about myself, which I was like, "People won't understand this, hide this, keep that to myself." That's, like that's a thing you just don't do in public. It was, like, autism, autism, autism. It's like, ooh, realizing how much of that I'd been hiding, like Elsa, conceal, don't feel.
That's right.
So is that what you would describe as like gender dysphoria, where you have that feeling of, I don't know, stress, overwhelm, because there's an incongruence in how people are, I, how you identify versus the, how you were assigned at birth? I don't know. Did that make sense?
Well, it's an incongruence between, like, for me, like, I am someone who likes, like, I need to be able to be authentic, not just likes, I have a need to be able to be authentic because it's so hard for me to stay between the lines. Like, anyway, that, like, I think I'm staying between the lines, but really I'm totally standing out even when I think I'm blending in, And so I'm putting through exhausting amounts of effort, to blend in when it's not even working. So that doesn't work out very well for me. But then also at the same time, like, it just really holds me down more to blend in. And then, with finding out I was autistic, the big thing is, like, that mask that you mentioned started to fall away because I started to really ask myself, like, how much things I was doing was performative or was for the sake of other people or because I thought it was expected of me or what I thought other people wanted me to do versus what I really wanted, or if I was really being myself or being authentic or speaking, what I felt was like my true feelings, and how I realized how much I was holding back. And so I started to let more of, like, my feelings and my needs be heard, which is hard because you have to, like, learn to be vulnerable. And I was not very good at being vulnerable at all at the beginning. And once a lot of that started to fall away, like the autism piece, the gender stuff was like just staring me in the face because I realized how much of that was also very performative and didn't feel authentic. And it was like, I would look at myself in the mirror, or I would, like, see myself, or just, be reminded of, just like myself, like, and it would just feel like I was being a fake person. Like, I felt fake, and just feeling like a fraud made me feel like I just hated myself for it. And so it's like it for me resulted in a lot of feelings of self-hatred and self-resentment, which I think is kind of interesting because before I was diagnosed autistic, I was going through a lot of feelings of self-hatred and self-loathing for a lot of my autistic traits before I realized those were autistic traits, because I was like trying to overcome all of these autistic traits and I couldn't do it. And I was like, why can't I do this? And I was just burning out and getting really sick. And I was like, I can do anything. And it was like, I didn't know it was being autistic. And then it was like, I was diagnosed autistic and I was like, oh, this isn't something to overcome. This is like, I don't have to keep fighting this anymore. I can just exist and, live and be for the first time in my life.
Were there any people that you just had to like cut out along the way, where it's like once you had that realization, you were like, okay, this isn't helpful for me to be around this person? Or, were you more intentional about who you were spending your time with and things like that?
Oh, absolutely. I cut my job and went to a different career path and went to a different employer first. So I cut everyone out, and that, because I realized not only was the people, but the environment was toxic, because toxic people create a
Yeah.
toxic environment. So I had to remove myself from that environment. And then the other thing is, like, it wasn't even just people that I chose to cut out, but people that, when I started to be more authentic and stop holding my tongue, people cut themselves out because they weren't my people to begin with. And that kind of sucks sometimes, because you're losing people that you thought were your people, and then you realize, once you stop putting this idyllic artificial person out there, that a lot of people you thought were your people aren't your people. But now, like, my circle's much smaller, but it's the people in my circle are worth their weight in gold, and they're people I really know I can trust. And I think that's worth a lot more, to me personally. I've also become a lot more aware of my own vulnerabilities and trying to, like, see if people are good for me or not. So I'm, like, really guarded. Like, you have to, like, make it through a lot of tests, and me being like a nervous, shy animal to, like, before I trust you enough to let you into that inner circle too. So it's like I keep that a lot. Uh, like, I'm more hesitant to let people in than I was before I found out I was autistic, because I'm really aware of how limited energy, like, is, especially like social energy, and how much social things are draining and confusing to me, especially with new people.
Yeah, and that makes me think about, we just recorded an episode on trauma,
Ooh.
and it's like, you're protecting yourself, but this is like a learned protection,
Oh, yeah.
Mm.
Because I used to be the opposite. Like, when I was a kid, I was completely the opposite. Like, I was the kid that would, like, go up and info dump to strangers about my special interest, which was dogs, and I would not have any idea. Nobody was interested. And I just keep rambling, and, like, people would just be nice to me because I was a kid and it was cute. But then once I got to be big enough that it wasn't cute anymore, I realized, like, people didn't actually like what I had to say. And then it became like the opposite, because I just started assuming, like, nobody wants to hear what you have to say. You're annoying, and you annoy everyone. And so it's like, it's been a total shift, like, for me. So now it's hard to believe anyone could possibly, like, not have ulterior motives because of all that trauma, like, I've experienced. Or, like, in high school, like, I didn't learn until high school that people would, like, pretend to be your friend when they weren't your friend, frenemies. And, like, I didn't have any, like, mental preparedness for that. And so, like, high school was really traumatic, because people would, like, pretend to be my friend because they wanted something from me, or they were going to trick me into doing something so that I would get in trouble and they could laugh at it, or, like, all of that stuff. It's like I learned a lot of that, like, just the hard way, because it was like, oh, I automatically thought, like, if people are nice to you, that means they're your friend, which isn't the case.
If only the world was like that.
Yeah.
And you have talked about, I think you said something along the lines of, like, once I let my freak flag fly is when I was able to, like, attract the people who were like me, And I'm just wondering, for, like, professionals listening, or parents who are wanting to support their child or their clients in building those authentic relationships, like, what was really helpful for you in being able to do that?
Yeah. So, for me, like, I had to really get to know myself first. And I think I didn't spend the first 30 years of my life knowing myself, which is really sad. But, a lot of autistic and neurodivergent people, other people, like, our whole lives, we have other people telling us who we are, like, what we should be able to accomplish. Like, for me, it was like, try a little harder, you're not applying yourself, or you're stubborn, you're a rebel, you're sensitive, you're this, you're that, you're that. You have so much potential if you would just, or, some of us, it's like, you don't have enough potential, or, they tell you're lazy, or, all these things, like, we're told we can't, or we can, or, and it's like, everyone's projecting onto us, and we don't know what we're capable of, especially with kids. Like, you don't know, like, with a little kid, especially, like, preschool or younger, like, what that kid's going to be capable of as an adult. You just can't. But what I do know is, if you take one kid and teach that kid their entire lives that and tell them they're never going to be able to do things, they're never going to amount to anything, tell them, constantly remind them of all the things they can't do, and you never show them the things that they're good at, and you never teach them to focus on their strengths, and you never teach them to grow their passions and their skills, then they're not going to succeed. But if you took that same exact kid and you nurture them and you teach them, to do the things they're good at and lean into their skills instead of, teaching them to only focus on like all their failures, you're going to have a very different self-esteem. Just because like those, there's like memes online talking about how your parents' voices become your inner monologue, and if it's
All
like
right. Yeah.
always berating you and it's like always telling you you're not enough, and this goes for neurotypical or neurodivergent kids, any regardless, like if the inner monologue from your parents was telling you weren't enough your whole life growing up as a kid, you're going to believe that as an adult. And unfortunately with autistic kids, everybody's always telling us what we're going to be, and so we have all of these external messages here, and so we need to like believe in ourselves so strongly. And I think that's the most important thing, is like getting these autistic people from a young age to be able to believe in themselves and know what they're capable of, instead of being so drawn into like what the world thinks they can't do.
That's so powerful. So true.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's excellent advice, in meeting the students with where they're at, rather than some of these approaches that are out there that you're probably real familiar with, where it's like teaching these neurotypical skills and this masking and all of these other harmful approaches is just not the way to go. I think, yeah, meeting the children where they're at, understanding differences and providing the tools as well as the language, so that way the narrative in their brain becomes the actions and their habits day to day.
Yeah.
Big
And I
time.
think I think you sharing your story is going to help so many people, and just talking about it so freely, because you have this like point in your life where it's like this anguish that you went through for 30 years or however many years, at least through high school, right? Or until your diagnosis, maybe 29. And then you have this like new version of yourself that you are trying to release and live more freely as yourself. And, for people to be able to hear what it's like on either side of that, I think is really powerful.
It's completely life-changing to have that perspective shift. And it's like, looking back at my life, it's like all the moments now like makes sense. It's like everything relates to Frozen. It's like that little snowman. It's like everything will make sense when you are older. It's like that wouldn't have happened if I didn't find out I was autistic. But now that I know that, it does make sense. It's like that's kind of the come full circle with it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
I was even thinking in like relationships and stuff too, when we are able to be ourselves, our authentic selves, and even show parts that we're uncomfortable with in ourselves, that ends up creating a true partnership. I think that's as I was thinking about that recently, I was like,
I'm going to show Jesse the real me.
But a lot of times, I'm not kidding. Like I was thinking about this, even just in relationships in general, a lot of times people will hide who they are their whole life.
Oh yeah.
That's
I love what you were saying though. I feel like that self-assessment is something everyone should do. Like everyone, where they go through and they say, well, am I doing this because it makes me happier? Or am I doing this for other people?
Yeah.
Like that would change the world if everyone could have that discovery.
Yeah, it's almost like even having that affirmation of, well, I understand this might make other people, I might not be pleasing everybody or making them uncomfortable, but I'm doing this for my own mental health and my own tranquility and peace.
Yeah.
And that's hard sometimes, if you're a recovering people pleaser, like that's really difficult.
That is Chris. He is a recovering people pleaser. You're learning.
I still do it, honestly. I'm not gonna lie. It's draining, but I still do it. I know that's definitely a hard thing.
We'll do this exercise tonight. This will be our pillow talk.
Well, the thing about being a people pleaser is that you don't set boundaries and limits. And so what ends up happening is that you just end up saying yes to everybody because you want to make them happy. And what ends up happening is you get so damn burnout. It really impacts you. Like,
and here's something to think about that if if you're a people pleaser out there, because this was a mind shift that really helped me with that. Is like when you're giving in to letting people violate your boundaries as a people pleaser, you think you're doing so to help out the relationship, but really you're ruining the relationship, because you're actually going to resent that person for violating your boundaries even though you let them violate your boundaries. And so you're actually completely like counterproductive to everything, like ruining the relationship, pissing yourself off because now you've let somebody push a boundary you didn't want to. So it doesn't actually help anything. It just kind of makes there more tension in the air, really, in the end, when it comes down to it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think about that. Like when you end up setting boundaries, the people that get upset or the ones that were taking advantage of you. It's like, you don't want those people anyway.
Exactly.
We're going to swat the moths, get them away. We'll attract the angels, not the moths.
The angels.
I was thinking about a light. You know how light attracts angels, but it attracts moths.
Does it attract angels?
Angel. That's yeah.
Oh,
Lights attract angels. I think that's the saying.
okay.
Get rid of the moths. Yeah.
Yes, get rid of the moths. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I just think this is going to be such a great conversation for so many people to hear.
Absolutely.
I think it's just helpful. We've learned a lot from you and all of your videos. And I will say, I think I first found you through your posts, for anyone interested, where Lyric posts, autistic asking autistics, and then you'll post a question and only autistic people are supposed to answer. And it's just like, we talk about those posts all the time, because it's really cool that you can post a question and then you have like hundreds of people, different people, all autistic with different opinions, commenting their experience. And it's just like, you're putting all of these perspectives in one post where you can read, which is awesome. So you guys should definitely follow Lyric. We will post your everything, your YouTube, your Instagram, your website.
Yeah. So it's on YouTube with they can search Neurodivergent Rebel, and that will be your YouTube channel.
You can search me anywhere. I'm YouTube. I've got my website as well. It's got transcripts of all my videos. I'm on Facebook, Instagram. I'm even on TikTok a little bit. But if you just search Neurodivergent Rebel, you can find me on any platform. A lot of the Asking Autistic stuff, if you want to see like a lot of the responses, are probably going to be on Instagram or Facebook. But like those community conversations were really important to me, because I never wanted my voice to be the only voice on my platform. So it's like I use my stories as a launch point, but there's a lot of great voices of people in the community who have a lot of different experiences. And I love getting to see and share those.
That's amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And you also do consulting, right? Do you want to share a little about that?
Yeah. And so I was working in-house in another consulting firm, and then COVID happened. And so I ended up on my own doing the same thing when there was like nothing else. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it's like I never would have jumped. So what I've been doing for the past several years is working with organizations of all different sizes, from 5 to over 1 million, that want to be more inclusive of neurodivergent people within their workplaces and organizations. But I only take on 3 to 5 clients in a month at the most. So that's why I wrote the book, Workplace Neurodiversity Rising, to try and make that into a handbook, because the client base that I take on is really limited, and it is a really big problem. And we really need every organization to start asking themselves if they really are inclusive, and if neurodivergent people within their workplaces have emotional safety to bring their authentic self to work. As we were talking about today, is like bringing your full authentic self and not having to hide parts of yourself away, like feeling like, are you safe enough to really be here? Because like with workplaces and organizations, especially if you want to have creativity and have people that are bringing new ideas and pushing the envelope, people need to have emotional safety to be creative and be vulnerable to bring those new ideas. Because if you have no emotional safety, innovators are going to be stifled and aren't even going to want to be sharing. So it's bad for business.
Yeah, you don't have to say that twice to us. We're big into that. yeah, you have to feel safe in order to even have access to those parts of your brain and be able to think in those creative ways. So
I wanted to mention too, because you mentioned consulting, and you never know who's watching this or who's going to listen, but Love on the Spectrum season 2 US version is starting to roll out their casting. And I want you to be the consultant for that show because they need that. I'm serious. They need you. They need somebody who gets it. Somebody who just comes at it with where you're coming from. That's what's needed, because nothing against the past seasons, but there have been some things where I'm like, they had the wrong.
They need a new
consultant.
editing team, though. They need a new editing because
They
like,
do.
what I've heard is they like added awkward pauses in there that weren't even really there and things like that. And I'm like, as long as they're going to portray it in that way, like I wouldn't honestly be willing to touch something like that with a 10-foot pole, because I can't know they're going to do a respectable portrayal.
That's what they need, a respectable portrayal, because I mean, in one of the seasons they were teaching neurotypical communication skills to autistic individuals, and then it kind of rolled out on the next show where it didn't work out so great. I'm like, well, gosh, why did they have this as the show?
I've not been able to get past one episode in either season or in that show.
Together right now is together probably because they have very similar interests of like water parks and amusement parks and animals. But anyway, we are slightly connected with a couple of people who have been on that show, so we just need to talk to them.
Yeah. And so here's one other thing I wanted to mention before we wrap it up, is that they need to pay the autistic casting people that are on it, because they haven't done that in the past, and that's just not right. So season 2, US version, pay the cast. Okay, anyway, I digress.
Yeah.
I digress.
Anyway, on the
I got off on a beaten path there.
Consulting. Yeah, I get it.
But you know where I was getting at. We're gonna reach. Yeah.
We need more people like Lyric doing the consulting.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for your time and for just sharing your stories. And we will put all of your links in our show notes and encourage everyone to follow you, because we've learned so much. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you both. Y'all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Absolutely. Bye.
Bye.